I always believed my son was mine. There was never a reason to question it, until that one moment that changed everything. It started as a small thought, a tiny whisper in the back of my mind that I tried to ignore. My son, Jason, had just turned 10, and as he grew older, I began noticing things that didn't add up. His features, his mannerisms, something felt off. He didn't look much like me, and people would often joke about it. He must take after his mother's side, they'd say with a laugh. I used to laugh too, but deep down, doubt started creeping in. Then came the moment that sent chills down my spine. My father had been hospitalized, and the doctors needed family medical history. As I filled out the forms, I realized something disturbing. Jason had a condition that no one in my family had ever suffered from. Not me, not my parents, not even my grandparents. That night, as I lay in bed next to my wife, Emily, my mind kept racing. Was I just being paranoid? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? I had to know the truth. And so I made a decision. I ordered a DNA test. I told myself it was just to put my mind at ease. But deep down I knew I was about to open a door that could never be closed. I had no idea that test would destroy everything I believed about my family. The DNA test kit arrived in a small, unmarked box. It felt heavier than it should have, maybe because of what it represented. This wasn't just some simple test. This was a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. I waited until I was alone with Jason. "Hey, buddy," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Let's do something fun. Ever heard of a DNA test? It tells you all about your ancestry." He was excited. He thought it was a game. I forced a smile as I swabbed his cheek and sealed the sample. My hands shook when I dropped the envelope in the mailbox. And then the waiting began. Days turned into weeks, and each passing moment felt like a lifetime. I watched my wife, Emily, more closely. Every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed me, I wondered, was she hiding something? Then the email arrived. My heart pounded as I clicked it open. My eyes scanned the words on the screen, and the air left my lungs. Probability of paternity 0%. I read it again, and again. My mind refused to believe it. Jason wasn't my son. The room spun. My hands clenched into fists. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I thought I might collapse. I wasn't Jason's father, and that meant my wife. My wife had been lying to me for over a decade. But the worst part? Something told me this was just the beginning. I sat at the kitchen table, the DNA results clutched in my trembling hands. My whole body felt like it was on fire. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak all at once. I heard the front door open. Emily walked in, smiling like everything was normal. "Hey, Han, how was your day?" she asked, setting down her purse. I didn't answer. Instead, I slid the paper across the table. "Read it." She frowned, then picked it up. I watched her face as her eyes moved across the words. First confusion, then realization, and finally fear. "Where did you get this?" she stammered, gripping the paper too tightly. "That doesn't matter," I said, my voice low and controlled. "What matters is that Jason isn't mine. And you knew it, didn't you?" Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words. Then she shook her head. "It's not what you think." I slammed my fist on the table, making her jump. "Don't lie to me, Emily. Not now." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were from guilt or just the fear of being caught. "I can explain," she whispered. I crossed my arms. "Go ahead. I'm listening." She took a shaky breath. It was a mistake. A long time ago, before we were married." I let out a bitter laugh. "A mistake? Jason is 10. We were already married." She paled. "Caught. Trapped. Who is his father?" I demanded. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. Whoever it was worse than I imagined. Silence stretched between us. Emily wouldn't look at me. Her hands trembled as she clutched the DNA test results, like she could somehow erase them if she held on tight enough. "Who is his father, Emily?" I asked again, my voice dangerously calm. She swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. That was the wrong answer. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "Doesn't matter? Are you kidding me? You lied to me for 10 years. I raised Jason as my own, and now you're telling me his real father doesn't matter." Tears streamed down her face, but I wasn't sure if they were for me, for Jason, or for herself. "I was scared," she choked out. "I thought if I told you the truth, I'd lose everything. You already have." I didn't say it out loud, but I knew it was true. My mind was spinning. Jason's real father was out there, living his life, completely unaware that he had a son. I needed to know who he was, not just for me but for Jason. Emily wasn't going to tell me. That much was clear. So I decided to find out myself. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I was going to uncover the truth no matter what it took. I barely slept that night. My mind kept racing, replaying every moment of my marriage. Every smile, every "I love you," every time Emily looked at Jason with a secret I never knew she was hiding. By morning, I had one goal: find out who Jason's real father was. Emily stayed silent, avoiding me like a guilty criminal. She knew I was searching, but she didn't try to stop me. Maybe she knew it was useless. I started with what I did know, our past. I scrolled through old messages, emails, anything that might hint at who she had been with back then. First, nothing. But then I dug deeper. Bank statements, travel receipts, hidden transactions. And there it was. A hotel booking 2 weeks before Jason was conceived. The name on the reservation wasn't mine. My blood ran cold. I recognized the name instantly. It was someone I knew, someone close. My hands clenched into fists. My marriage wasn't just built on lies. It was built on betrayal far worse than I ever imagined. I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The name on the hotel booking burned into my mind like a brand. No, couldn't be him. I stormed into the living room, where Emily sat curled up on the couch, eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up at me, fear flashing across her face. "Tell me the truth, Emily. Was it him?" Her lips quivered. She didn't answer. I threw the phone on the coffee table, the hotel receipt pulled up. "You met him here, 2 weeks before Jason was conceived." "Don't lie to me." Emily let out a shaky breath. I didn't mean for it to happen." I felt my stomach twist. "So it's true," I whispered. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. The room spun. My knees felt weak. I sat down hard, staring at the floor. My worst fear wasn't just a possibility, it was real. Jason's real father was my best friend. The man who had been there for me through everything. The man who stood beside me at my wedding. The man I trusted like a brother. And he had slept with my wife. Emily reached for my hand, but I pulled away like her touch burned. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she sobbed. I laughed bitterly. "Oh, how exactly did you plan for me to find out? Or were you just going to keep lying forever?" She buried her face in her hands, but I had no sympathy left. I had lost my wife, my son, my best friend, and the life I thought I had was nothing but a lie. But this wasn't over, not even close. Jason was upstairs, unaware that his entire world had just shattered. But he deserved to know. I sat on the couch, my heart pounding. How do you tell a 10-year-old that the man he calls dad isn't really his father? That his mother had lied to both of us for his entire life? Emily wiped her tears and shook her head. "Please don't tell him. He doesn't need to know. He loves you. You're his father, no matter what." Her words stung because part of me wanted to believe them. I had raised Jason, taught him how to ride a bike, stayed up with him when he was sick, cheered him on at every school event. But love wasn't the same as truth. I took a deep breath. "He deserves to know who he is, Emily. I won't lie to him the way you did." Before she could protest, Jason's footsteps echoed down the stairs. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy. "Why are you guys yelling?" Emily looked at me, silently begging me to drop it. But I couldn't. I patted the seat next to me. "Come here, buddy." He sat down, looking between us. "What's wrong?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. How do you tell a child his world isn't what he thought? I took his small hand in mine. Jason, there's something we need to talk about. Something really important. He frowned. Am I in trouble? I shook my head. No, son. But I found out something about our family. About you. Emily turned away, biting her lip. Jason's white eyes locked onto mine. He trusted me. He believed in me. And I was about to change everything he knew. I took a deep breath. Jason, I'm not your biological father. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. His little face twisted in confusion. What? That doesn't make sense. I squeezed his hand gently. I love you. That will never change. But your real father is someone else. He stared at me, shaking his head. No, that's not true. You're my dad. Emily sobbed softly in the corner, but I focused on Jason. He deserved honesty. I wish I could tell you it isn't true, but it is. And I'm so sorry, buddy. Tears welled up in his eyes. Then, who is my real dad? I hesitated. This was the moment that would define everything. Emily shot me a warning look, silently pleading. But I wasn't protecting her anymore. I took a deep breath. It's my best friend. Uncle Mark. Jason blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. The shock hit him all at once. He jumped up. No, you're lying. Uncle Mark wouldn't. Mom wouldn't. Emily broke down, covering her face. Her silence told him everything. Jason turned to me, his whole body trembling. You're still my dad, right? His voice was barely a whisper. I pulled him into my arms, hugging him tight. Always, no matter what, but deep down, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't do it. Not right away. I spent days, maybe even weeks, pacing and planning, wrestling with the urge to confront Mark, my best friend, the man who betrayed me in a way I couldn't even begin to process. I knew I had to face him. Jason deserved to know the full truth, and I deserved answers. The question that burned in my chest was, why? Why would Mark do this to me? I called him. My hands shook as I dialed his number. The phone rang for what felt like forever. Finally, he picked up. Hey man, what's up? His voice was casual, too casual. I clenched my teeth. We need to talk. In person. Now. There was a pause. Then, reluctantly, he agreed. All right, I'll be there in an hour. I didn't waste time getting ready. My mind was already racing, each thought darker than the last. Was Mark going to deny it? Was he going to lie again? Or was he finally going to own up to the truth? When he walked in, he looked the same. The same guy I'd shared so many laughs with, the one who'd always been there during tough times. But now, he was a stranger. I didn't give him a chance to sit down. I went straight to the point. Jason knows the truth. Mark froze, his eyes widening. What are you talking about? I didn't care about his confusion. I didn't care about his acting innocent. I needed answers. I know, Mark. About you and Emily. About Jason. I spit out the words like they were poison. He opened his mouth to speak but closed it again, unable to find the right words. The silence between us was thick. Why, Mark? I choked out. Why did you do this? You were my best friend. You knew how much I loved Emily, how much I loved Jason. Mark finally looked down, his shoulders slumping. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I laughed bitterly. Oh, so it just happened? You didn't plan it? You didn't know exactly what you were doing when you slept with my wife. I was weak, he muttered. I wasn't thinking clearly. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. A mistake. That's all he could say. I stepped closer to him, my fists clenched. You ruined my life, Mark. You ruined Jason's life. You took everything I trusted, everything I believed in, and destroyed it. Mark looked up at me, his face red with shame. I'm sorry, man. I really am. But I don't know what else to say. I stared at him, the betrayal stinging deeper than anything I'd ever felt. But in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't the real enemy. Emily was. I didn't want to hear any more from Mark. His apology felt hollow. There was no fixing what he'd done. No making it right. I turned away from him. I can't forgive you, Mark. I don't think I ever will. With that, I walked out of the room, leaving him to stew in his guilt. Jason needed me more than I needed answers from him. I thought confronting Mark would bring me closure. I thought that after facing him, I'd finally have the peace I was desperately searching for. But the truth is, everything felt even more tangled. I had pulled one thread, and now the entire web was unraveling. When I got home that evening, Emily was sitting on the couch, her face pale and worn. She didn't look like the woman I'd known for all these years. She looked like a stranger. She barely met my eyes as I walked in. "Did you talk to him?" "Yeah, I talked to him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the anger inside me felt like it might explode at any moment. "But the truth is, he's not the only one I need to talk to." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I crossed the room and stood in front of her. "Emily, it's not just Mark. You've been lying to me for years. You and him. The affair wasn't a one-time thing, was it?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The guilt in her eyes said everything I needed to know. "How long?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "How long has this been going on?" Emily's shoulders slumped as she broke down, the tears pouring from her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to happen. It was just, I was unhappy, and Mark was always there for me when you weren't." I took a step back, trying to process what she just said. Unhappy? All those years, I had been working, providing, loving her and Jason, while she was getting comfort in the arms of my best friend. "But that's not all, is it?" I asked quietly, my heart sinking further. "There's more, isn't there?" Her face twisted in anguish. I didn't just sleep with Mark. There were others, too. I was always looking for something I didn't have. My mind raced, my chest tightening with every word she spoke. How many men did you betray me with?" Emily, trembling, she whispered. "I lost count. It wasn't just one affair. There were others. And it wasn't just sex. It was the need for validation. I needed to feel wanted. Wanted? That was the excuse?" My fists clenched, and I felt the room closing in on me. I had been living in a lie for so long. Every part of our life together, every memory, now felt tainted. I had loved her so much, and all this time, she was betraying me. "I trusted you," I whispered. "I trusted you with my heart, with our family, and you threw it all away." She shook her head, sobbing harder now. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to stop." I walked away, feeling suffocated. There were no more words to say. The betrayal had gone deeper than I ever imagined, and now it felt like everything I had built was crumbling around me. Jason had already been through so much. How could I tell him everything? How could I expose his mother, the woman who raised him, to the truth? But I couldn't protect her anymore. I had to make sure Jason knew the reality of what his life had been. He deserved to understand the choices she had made and how they affected us all. There was no going back. As I walked out of the house, leaving Emily sobbing behind me, I knew one thing for sure. The web of lies was shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed my departure from Emily's tears was deafening. As I sat alone in my car, I tried to gather my thoughts, but they were scattered like broken glass. Everything had changed. The life I'd known, the family I tried so hard to hold together, was no longer the same. I knew I had to face Emily again. I couldn't just walk away without hearing what she had to say. But what more could she possibly say? What could she say that would change anything? I didn't know if I was going back for answers or just to hear her try to justify the unjustifiable. But I found myself heading back to the house. When I walked in, Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes still red from crying. She stood up when she saw me, but I didn't wait for her to speak. Couldn't. "No more excuses, Emily." The words came out sharp and cold. More for me than for her. "I don't want to hear it. I've heard enough. You ruined everything." She stepped closer, desperation in her eyes. "Please listen to me. I know I've made mistakes, horrible mistakes, but it wasn't just about the affair. It was about feeling empty inside, about feeling ignored. You were always working, always busy, and I felt like I was invisible, invisible. Couldn't believe it. All this time, I'd been doing everything I could to support her, to give her everything she wanted, and she had the nerve to say I made her feel invisible. I wasn't invisible to you when I gave you everything, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. I was there for you, for our family. But you couldn't wait to find someone else. Could you? She took a step forward, her voice trembling. It wasn't like that. It wasn't about the sex. It wasn't even about love. It was about feeling seen, feeling important. I needed to know I still mattered. And did you? I snapped. Did Mark and the others make you feel important? Did their attention fill the emptiness inside of you? Did it make you feel better? She swallowed hard, her face crumpling as the weight of her own words hit her. I was selfish. I didn't think about how it would hurt you. I never imagined the pain I'd cause. But please don't let this be the end. I'm sorry. I love you. I need you. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly smothered by the rage burning in me. She was sorry, but her apologies meant nothing now. I've heard enough of your excuses, I said, cutting her off. You don't get to tell me how much you love me after you've shattered everything we built. Emily fell to her knees, her voice breaking. Please don't leave me. Don't leave us. But I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I couldn't unsee the lies, the betrayal. It didn't matter how many times she said she was sorry. It didn't matter if she loved me now. I turned my back to her, feeling my heart weigh heavy in my chest. You don't get to decide what happens next, Emily. I do. I walked out of the house, not looking back. The only thing I knew for sure was that nothing would ever be the same. It wasn't until the next day that I learned the truth. I had barely slept the night before, my mind racing through the events of the past few days. The lies, the affairs, the betrayal. I tried to make sense of it all, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I really knew. I wasn't prepared for what happened when I went back to the house. I had expected Emily to be there, her tear-streaked face pleading for forgiveness, asking for another chance. But this time, I wasn't looking for redemption. I wasn't looking for any more excuses. Instead, what I found waiting for me was something far worse. As I stepped through the door, my eyes immediately caught the envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed the name on it. My name. Curiosity got the best of me, and before I could stop myself, I opened it. Inside was a letter from my lawyer, dated just a few days before I'd found out about the affair. The contents of the letter made my stomach churn. It was a legal document, a divorce agreement. I stared at the paper, unable to comprehend what I was reading. Emily had already started planning to leave me. She had already made the decision to walk away from everything we had, and now it was all laid out in black and white. I could feel my hands shaking as I read through the terms. She had prepared for the worst. She had already taken steps to secure her future, even if it meant destroying mine in the process. But that wasn't the worst part. I turned the page, and that's when I saw it. At the very bottom of the document, there was a signature, Mark's signature. Mark. I could barely breathe. My head spun as I realized that not only had Emily been planning to leave me, but she had been doing it with the man who had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Mark wasn't just a friend. He was a partner in this betrayal. I thought I had understood the extent of the lies. But this was a whole new level. My best friend, the one I had trusted for years, had been conspiring with my wife to destroy me. The anger burned inside me, hotter than ever. I thought I had been betrayed enough. But this was the ultimate betrayal. I walked into the living room, my heart racing as I looked at Emily, who was still sitting on the couch, her face pale and distant. She didn't even try to hide the truth anymore. You knew, didn't you? I asked, my voice shaking with fury. You knew all along. You planned this. You and Mark. She didn't deny it. Instead, she nodded, the shame evident in her eyes. I didn't know how to stop. Started as a way to escape, but then it became a plan. A way out. A way out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, You both made sure that when it was over, you'd walk away with everything. My family, my life, my trust. You both just planned to take it all, didn't you? Emily's silence was all the confirmation I needed. I looked at her, my heart shattering in a way I didn't think was possible. You don't deserve me, Emily, and you definitely don't deserve Jason. She reached for me, her voice desperate. Please don't say that. Please, we can work through this. We can fix it. But I wasn't listening anymore. Couldn't. I turned and walked out, the weight of the betrayal too much to bear. The final thread that held everything together had snapped. And now I was free. I didn't expect it to hit me this hard. After everything, the lies, the betrayal, the broken trust, I thought the hardest part would be letting go of Emily, but that was nothing compared to what came next. The moment I realized how this whole mess was going to affect Jason, I felt like the world was collapsing around me. Jason had always been my rock, my son, my pride, the one person who made everything worth fighting for. But now, even he was a victim of the deceit that had consumed our lives. It had been a few days since I'd learned the truth about Emily and Mark. I had told myself I was doing what was best, keeping a distance, trying to figure out my next move. But when Jason came to me, his eyes full of confusion and pain, I realized I had to deal with this now. For him. Dad, Jason said softly, sitting beside me, "Can I ask you something?" His voice sounded small, fragile. A boy who had just had his whole world torn apart, and he didn't even know the full truth yet. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated before speaking, and I could see the weight of his words already pressing down on him. "I heard you and Mom talking about the DNA test." The room seemed to grow quieter. Jason knew. He must have known. "Jason," I started, my heart aching as I struggled to find the right words. "I need you to understand something." He cut me off before I could continue. "I'm not stupid, Dad. I know you're upset about the test. I just don't get it. Why would Mom why would she do this?" I could feel my chest tighten. He didn't know the truth yet. He didn't know that the DNA test had revealed he wasn't really my son. He wasn't mine. "Jason," I couldn't bring myself to say the words. I didn't know how to tell him that the man he thought was his father wasn't. That his whole sense of identity was about to crumble. He saw the pain in my eyes and grew more agitated. "Dad, please, tell me, am I really your son?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How could I answer him? How could I explain the truth without tearing him apart in the process? I pulled him close, my arms wrapping around him. "You are my son, Jason," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You are my son in every way that matters." But I knew, deep down, that there would always be a part of him that would wonder, that would question his place in my life. The reality of what had happened hit me like a wave. Jason had been living a lie too. His entire sense of who he was had been shaped by this one woman's decisions. And now everything was shattered. "Dad," Jason whispered again, his voice trembling. "What does this mean for me? Who am I now?" I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't know. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? But I knew one thing for sure. Jason deserved to know the truth. He deserved to understand what had happened, even if it meant facing the hardest reality of his life. The moment I looked at him, I realized that my pain wasn't just my own anymore. It was his too. And no matter what happened next, I was going to do everything I could to help him find his way through this chaos. "I'll help you through this," I promised, my voice breaking as I held him tighter. "We'll get through this together, Jason. You're not alone." The truth was out, and now the battle had only just begun. I had always believed that I could handle anything life threw at me, but this was different. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my family anymore. I was fighting for my son's future, for his sense of self. The fallout from the DNA test, the betrayal, and the lies had left us all broken in ways I never imagined. But I wasn't going to let Emily's actions ruin Jason's life. As soon as I processed everything, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to stay quiet, not after all of the lies Emily had fed me, and especially not after seeing the way Jason was struggling. This wasn't just a relationship that was over. It was a whole new reality I had to face head-on. I met with a lawyer, someone who came highly recommended. She was tough, sharp, and understood how deep the betrayal ran. Her name was Rachel, and the moment we started talking, I knew she was someone I could trust to fight for what was right. First things first, Rachel said, her tone direct but empathetic. We need to secure Jason's future. This DNA test has changed everything, but legally we have options. We can challenge the paternity issue, and we may even be able to get sole custody depending on how things go. I sat there, the weight of her words sinking in. I was facing the reality of a legal battle, one I never expected to fight. I had never even thought about a divorce or custody issues until now. But after hearing Rachel lay it all out, I realized I didn't have a choice. We'll need all the evidence we can get. Any proof of Emily's affair, any financial records, anything that can show her lack of commitment to Jason's well-being, Rachel continued. This might be a long process, but we'll make sure Jason is protected. It was a lot to process. I was about to dive into a legal nightmare, but I couldn't back down. Jason needed me, and I was going to make sure he was safe from the chaos Emily had caused. I left the meeting feeling a little more confident, but also completely exhausted. The fight was just beginning, and I had no idea what was coming next. But things took an unexpected turn when an unlikely ally stepped forward. As I was organizing documents at home, Emily called me. I didn't pick up at first. After everything, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her voice. But then, she sent a text that made my blood run cold. I need to talk. It's about Jason. I stared at my phone, conflicted. What could she possibly have to say? Was she trying to make amends? Or was this another attempt to twist the story in her favor? I didn't reply right away, but then she called again. Something in her voice made me pause. This wasn't the same angry, defensive woman I had been hearing from for days. I answered, "What do you want, Emily?" My voice was firm, but there was a trace of weariness in it. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice shaky. "I know I messed up, but Jason, he's my son too. And I don't want him to hate me for what I've done. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily was actually sounding like she cared. After everything that had happened, it seemed too little, too late. But as I listened, a small part of me wondered, could this really be an attempt at redemption? Or was it just another manipulation? "I want to be there for Jason," she continued. "I'm willing to help with the legal stuff. You're right about everything, I was wrong. But I don't want this to tear him apart." I didn't know how to respond. My mind was racing. Could she actually be sincere? Was she trying to take some responsibility for once? "I don't know if I can trust you, Emily," I finally said, my voice low. "But Jason needs both of us to make this right. If you're serious about this, we'll need to work together. For him." She was quiet for a long moment, but then she spoke again, her voice softer. "I'm serious. I'll do whatever it takes." Was this the start of a new chapter? Or was I falling for another lie? Only time would tell. But for the sake of Jason, I had no choice but to give her the chance to prove herself. This was a fight that required every ally, even the ones I never thought I would have. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Rachel and I worked tirelessly on building a case, and surprisingly, Emily started to play a part, though it wasn't without its complications. She provided documents and information, but there was still an air of uncertainty surrounding her. I couldn't let my guard down completely. The legal battle was still far from over, but for the first time in weeks, I started to feel like there was hope. Not just for the case, but for Jason's future. The court date was set. Everything had led up to this moment, and the pressure felt unbearable. I had spent weeks thinking about my next move. The battle was more than just a legal fight. It was about justice. It was about my son's future, and it was about me finally getting the answers I deserved. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, was this about revenge or redemption? I had so many emotions running through me. Anger for the way Emily had betrayed me. Betrayal for the lies she had told me for years. But alongside all of that, I couldn't ignore a deeper, quieter feeling. A feeling of sorrow. I had loved her once, and seeing her so broken, so vulnerable in court, made me question everything I thought I knew. Was I trying to punish her for the pain she caused? Or was I just trying to make sure my son had the stability he needed? It was time to face those questions. Time to choose what kind of man I was going to be. As the day of the trial approached, I found myself staring at the documents in front of me. Rachel had done an incredible job building a case. We had the DNA test. We had the evidence of Emily's affair. And worst of all, we had the financial records that painted a picture of neglect and dishonesty. But there was more. The truth about Jason's paternity. It was a gut-wrenching blow. And I knew that no matter the outcome, nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't look at Emily the same way anymore. The woman I had once loved and trusted felt like a stranger to me now. But what would exposing all of this really achieve? Would it help Jason? Or would it tear us apart even further? The courtroom was packed when I walked in, the air thick with tension. Rachel stood by my side, ready to fight for what was right. But as I looked around, I couldn't help but notice how empty I felt. This was the end of a chapter, the end of a life I thought I knew. Emily entered the room, her eyes avoiding mine. She looked pale, almost fragile. I hated that I could still feel sorry for her. But I had to be strong. Jason's future depended on it. The proceedings began, and Rachel immediately took control. She presented the DNA test, the affair evidence, and all the facts that painted Emily as a woman who had betrayed everything, me, our family, and our son. The courtroom was silent as the truth unfolded. I watched as Emily's face turned red, her hands shaking as she struggled to maintain composure. Was she regretting her actions now? Was she realizing the weight of what she had done? But when it was her turn to speak, she didn't break down. Instead, she stood up, her voice trembling but clear. "I've made mistakes," she began, her words cutting through the courtroom. "I've hurt my family, and I know there's no way to take that back. But Jason, he is my son. I love him, and I want him to have the chance to grow up knowing both his parents. Despite the mistakes I've made." It was a confession, but it wasn't an apology. And in that moment, I realized that Emily wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for redemption. As she spoke, I thought about everything that had happened. About the betrayal, about the secrets, and about how, despite all of it, Emily was still Jason's mother. And that was something I couldn't take away from her, no matter how much I wanted to. But then, the unexpected happened. Rachel, who had been quietly observing the entire trial, stood up. She walked to the center of the courtroom, holding a piece of paper in her hand. She turned toward the judge and slowly read aloud. "Your Honor, this is a letter from Jason's biological father. He wants to meet Jason and be part of his life. And he's willing to provide for him financially." The room went silent. My heart dropped. The truth was about to get even more complicated. Emily froze. I saw the panic in her eyes as the implications of the letter hit her. Her affair wasn't just a secret anymore. It was about to change everything. The man she had been seeing, the father of Jason, was now stepping forward to claim him. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, shock, anger. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. Now, it was about Jason's right to know who he was, his real identity, his family history. The judge turned to me. "What do you wish to do with this new information?" My mind was spinning. Was this the ultimate betrayal? Or was this a chance for redemption? For everyone? "I think it's time Jason learns the truth," I said, my voice firm but calm. "He deserves to know who he is, where he comes from. And if his biological father wants to be part of his life, then we'll deal with that." The judge nodded and turned to Emily. "And you, Mrs. Walker? Do you consent to this?" Emily's voice shook as she replied, "Yes. I want him to know. I want him to have the chance to choose." As the gavel came down, I realized that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about finding a path forward. For me, for Jason, for Emily. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in months, I felt like there was hope. Not just for me or Emily, but for Jason. Maybe redemption was possible after all. The dust had settled, but the air still felt thick with tension. Life as I once knew it was over. What had been my world, the life I'd built with Emily, had come crumbling down. But Jason, my son, he was the reason I could still hope. Hope for a future that would finally be free of lies and secrets. The months after the trial were a whirlwind of change. Jason began to spend time with his biological father, a man named Derek. He was kind, calm, and ready to step into a fatherly role. But as Jason grew closer to Derek, I couldn't help but notice the subtle pain in his eyes. He was torn. Jason was struggling with the truth. Who was he really? Was he the son of the man who raised him, or the son of the man who had come into his life so unexpectedly? He was caught in the middle of two worlds, neither of which truly felt like home. It wasn't easy for any of us. But in the end, Jason made a decision that shocked me. He wanted to live with me. It wasn't that he didn't care about Derek. He did. But Jason needed stability. He needed to feel like he belonged, like he could rebuild his identity without feeling torn in two. I knew that decision wasn't easy for him. It was painful to watch as he said goodbye to Derek, promising to keep in touch, but I could see it in his eyes. He needed his father. For me, it was a chance to become the dad I had always wanted to be, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over us. Jason and I began rebuilding our relationship, piece by piece. We spent weekends together, doing simple things. Fishing, playing games, talking about his hopes and dreams. Slowly, things started to feel normal again, like we were healing. But Emily, she was still a part of our story. And for her, things weren't as simple. She had lost everything. Her marriage, her family, and now even her son. Jason had chosen to be with me, and no matter how much she apologized, no matter how many times she begged for forgiveness, I couldn't take her back. Not after everything. Not after the lies, the betrayal. She tried to stay involved in Jason's life, but it wasn't the same. The bond she once had with him had been shattered, and now, she had to learn to live with the consequences of her actions. Still, I couldn't deny that I felt sympathy for her. She wasn't a monster. She was a person who made mistakes just like all of us. But I couldn't let her mistakes dictate my life or Jason's future. We had a new beginning now, and that's what mattered. As for Derek, he wasn't a constant presence in Jason's life, but he respected the boundaries. He knew that Jason needed time. There was still hope for a relationship between them, but that would take time. Time for Jason to figure out what kind of father he needed. It was strange, really. I was rebuilding everything from the ground up, while Emily was left to face the wreckage of her choices. She still tried to reach out to Jason, but I could see the distance in his eyes. She wasn't the mother he remembered, and as much as I wanted to feel sorry for her, I knew the truth. She had lost her place in our family. But for Jason, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I was determined to be the father he deserved. No more secrets, no more lies. Just truth, just love. As time passed, things began to fall into place. Jason found his footing again, and so did I. We were finally free from the past, building a future on our own terms. And as for Emily, I hoped she could find redemption too. But that was her journey. She had to live with the consequences of her actions, just as I had to live with mine. And so here we are, a new beginning for me and Jason, but not for everyone. What about you? Have you ever had to make a tough decision between revenge and redemption? How did you handle it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. I'll see you next time.